we had not seen hardware being used as a weapon. Now we are. And we need to ask ourselves, where does that lead?
Hello, welcome to a conversation on privacy, decentralization, and the future of our freedoms with Edward Snowden and Jarrad Hope. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
To start the conversation, I was wondering if, Edward, you could tell us a bit more about your thoughts. Over 10 years ago, through your very brave and courageous act, the world found out about the extensive and intrusive nature of global surveillance, including the mass collection of phone records and internet communications of millions of people. Looking back, how do you see the evolving nature of these threats? What's your perspective of what's been happening over the past 10 years?
So this is, it sounds like a quick question, but it's actually a very long question because we have to consider what happened in 2013 and why did it happen. What I'm known for, of course, is revealing documents from the United States government and affiliated governments as part of the Five Eyes sort of surveillance alliance, which is the Anglophone countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, where they had worked together as part of a true, real life global conspiracy. I mean, it's in their own documents. They've got names and meetings, even logos and branding, um, to try to monitor everything about everyone to the extent that was technically possible at the time. And what their justification was in the context of, they were saying preventing terrorism and serious crime, threats to national security is the language that we're beginning to use more and more now. But really, it was this post 9/11 uh, securitization thrust, which was we need to see everything because we don't know what we're looking for. And of course, terrorists are everywhere. They're behind every blade of grass, and they're in your attic upstairs. And the only people who can prevent them from destroying the world were our brave and trustworthy intelligence agencies. Now, they recognized that what they were doing, frankly, was wrong. And so they got all of their lawyers together step by step, sometimes with legislators, most often not, particularly in the case of the United States, how this started originally. Um, they just said, in the wake of September 11th, the attacks, that there's a new national emergency. The old laws no longer bind us, control us, are responsive to the threat. And so we're going to move in advance of legislation, start collecting everything we can from everyone, but we will only look at it if we have a reasonable suspicion that this person is up to no good. So the idea is that they watch you through your whole life, all of your communications that they can catch. Uh, and they argue this is justified, it's okay, it's proportionate to the threat presented by terrorism if they just pinky swear that they won't actually look at your email personally because you're not a bad guy. But if you are a bad guy, they already have everything. So when you come to their attention later, whether it's 3 weeks later, whether it's 3 years later, whether eventually it's 30 years later, they have everything that happened before. So then they can wind back the surveillance time machine and see a perfect picture of your life, your private life, your activities, all human activities. See what paths you cross with, see who your affiliates and associates are. Every purchase you make, everywhere you went, everything you read, everything you typed into that Google search box, everything that's in your Gmail account, how long you scrolled and stopped on every page that has one of those little Facebook analytic shims through JavaScript embedded in it. Uh, and this was the way it was going to be. But the public didn't know about it. The Congress didn't know about it. And the courts didn't know about it. And of course, it was illegal. Uh, I came forward, I revealed evidence of this. They called me the worst names in the book. trader, of course. They said I was a Chinese spy because I met with journalists in Hong Kong. Then I left China, and we're like, oh, I guess not. Now he's a Russian spy. I was supposed to go to Latin America, and then I guess they would have gone, oops, he's a Latin American spy. But the idea is just if someone says something that's uncomfortable for the regime, that points out that they're not living up to the publicly professed ideals and aspirations that they are supposed to be working to defend, that person is the enemy. Uh, but again, how did we arrive here? What were the intelligence agencies supposed to be doing? Uh, the idea of the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, when they were conceived in the wartime and post-war periods, uh, was that they would collect as much information as was available either through human sources or through research, looking at newspapers, translating things, that they could understand the general events of the world, gist these, produce an sort of assessment and analysis from that, and provide these to policymakers that could guide their decisions on basically creating foreign and directing foreign policy, specifically foreign policy, military policy, uh, and that would be it. That was the point of it. Well, as the Cold War, uh, the idea that they would be limited to military and sort of foreign policy meant that their budgets would go down. Bill Clinton famously cut military budgets during his presidency. There was what's called a peace dividend. And everybody who was in charge there was very threatened by that. The defense industry was very threatened by that. The idea that we didn't need the world's largest permanent military, that we didn't need a gigantic network of allies who were sort of marching in lockstep to spy on the world forever, um, created a counter movement, so sort of counter revolutionary movement within the US government, where they went, well, how do we arrest this decline in budgets and influence and power for the military intelligence establishment? Uh, and so they created all these plans, all of these laws, all of these arguments. They went out on TV to try to expand their budgets, to try to reclaim these lost authorities, to try to find new what they called lines of business for this great sort of military intelligence bureaucracy. And they failed. No one was persuaded. Nobody thought they were useful. And then September 11th happened. Then we had a major terrorist attack in the United States. And the vice president of the United States, Dick Cheney, met with his personal lawyer, the White House counsel for the vice president called Dick Addington. And they came out with a scheme to create this new surveillance. The Patriot Act was launched, which was already written, mind you, before the attacks happened. They just couldn't pass it. It wasn't popular. It was a violation of the Constitution. It reshaped sort of the boundaries of the rights enjoyed by Americans. And the only people that it really benefited was this military conglomeration. So all of these things came off the shelf. And in the moment of panic and in the moment of maximum influence for these intelligence people, they basically had the success of the century. They began doing everything they wanted in secret. They reshaped the laws to permit what they could do publicly to some extent through the Patriot Act and what was to be expected. But even that wasn't enough. They still continue to go beyond what the laws authorize, beyond what the budgets authorize, beyond what everyone authorized to do what they conceived of being their new mission to do, which was to keep everyone safe from everything all the time. But that's only possible in a prison. And so that's really what happened. We moved from an intelligence group that was analysis based to then one that did targeted surveillance. Foreign generals, embassies, people who were suspected of crimes that they had actually gone to a court and got them to authorize an individual warrant for, to then this new world of mass surveillance, where they try to capture everything about everyone just in case. So they already have it because they go, if we don't monitor it prospectively, we'll have lost our chance. That communication will age off. It'll be ephemeral. It'll be lost. But that's what we all had. That's what the internet had. That's the internet that I fell in love with, that I think you fell in love with, that we all fell in love with. The sort of chaotic internet that was not, corporate silos and Gmail accounts, but it was little individual janky projects and websites that were ramshackle. They were unprofessional, but they were original. They were creative. They were human. They were inspired. And then they were lost. The website shut down. There was no archive copy. There was nothing there. Your computer crashed. You lost your email spool. That's gone. There were bulletin board systems where we made friends and we lost friends. The servers shut down or whatever. But the idea is that just like our human face-to-face communications, these things didn't last forever. They were transient. They were lost with systems, just like memories are lost as people pass. And what we have seen since, from sort of the Web 1.0 to the Web 2.0, is this permanent record where nothing on the internet is ever to be lost because it has value to institutions, to commerce, to corporations, and to governments, and to investigators. And that was the road to 2013. Now, the road beyond 2013 is where we've moved from mass surveillance that is happening, but partially, imperfectly, because it had to be formed so secretly. Now it's being done more openly. It's being done more openly by many different governments. It's being done, in fact, by corporations now. You've seen blockchain companies just in the last month that are starting to talk about how they're going to de-anonymize crypto users without their consent, without their involvement or anything like that. To this, the idea that now we're moving into a world where mass surveillance is not suspected, but rather presumed. And I think the question is, what lies beyond that? Right now, people see it happening and they don't like it. If you do polls on this, it's not a popular policy, but people feel powerless to change. They feel like they can't stop it. And what lies beyond that, what will get people to actually change their behavior, change their politics, change their activities, is when the pain starts. Right now, it happens so invisibly that most people, even if they understand that it's happening in some way, they don't understand practically what that means, what the impact for them is. Right now, the internet is still front-loading the joy and back-loading the pain. We see the gates coming down, with Reddit shutting down its APIs, with Twitter shutting down, the ability to freely browse, with Facebook trying to, take over the internet, bring everybody over to the news side with threads, with the SEC and the government's attempts to monopolize finance that was meant to be permissionless on systems like Ethereum, through Tornado Cash, where they start to actually throw developers in jail for creating privacy tools and say, like, this is some kind of pro-terrorism threat or whatever. Right now, that's still happening in a limited measure. But as mass surveillance entrenches itself and is everywhere, it becomes omnipresent, and eventually, inevitably, it becomes oppressive. You know it's there because the consequences become automated. You start to feel, a ticket shows up in your mailbox because a camera caught you. People have seen that for a while now, and they don't like it. But again, and they just accept that it's the case because the consequences aren't that severe. And they go, well, it's breaking a rule. But the rules change. And the more you see this, the more the chains start to weigh you down. But then, to avoid leaving us on the dark note here, what is beyond this sort of omnipresent oppression? And I think that's where you get resistance, and eventually you get release. People move beyond that because they fight the system. We have people fighting today. Perhaps you and your project, me to some extent that I can, but a larger, wider community. Everybody who's watching this right now, they care about this. They recognize that something is not right with the system that we have today, and they want to see it change. Well, today that number is small relative to the human population, but over time that grows. They realize that we came from a world where this wasn't taken for granted. It wasn't presumed that this was happening. it was resisted. And just like sort of there was an old day where we presumed that there were nobles and lords and kings that were above us, the serfs, the plebs that sort of lived in the fields. We changed that reality. And I think in time we will change that again.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. So, there were so many things that we'll try to delve into and discuss further. But before we get into detail, and I know you've mentioned this before, but for those viewers and listeners, and for those of us who are not yet intimately familiar with some of the details that you've outlined before, I just wanted to hear, why do you think people should care about privacy across the board? I know you've mentioned this before, but it'd be really interesting to hear it again.
Sure. I mean, there's a thousand different ways to look at it, but fundamentally, privacy is power. If you have no privacy, you have no power. You exist under observation. Therefore, all of your activities are known. They are predictable, and that means they're preemptible. Uh, Institutions like this state because they have privacy. The government has a state secrets privilege. Corporations have their own veils of secrecy that are very difficult to pierce because they've got locks and guards outside there. They've got closed rooms. They've got IT staffs. They've got security budgets. Uh, they know everything about what you're doing, but you know very little about what they're doing. When there's a scandal, there's a long period of investigation where even for governments, it takes 10 years of litigation to get a fine that comes down on somebody like Facebook for, a state entity the size of the European Union. But then Facebook still doesn't pay the fine. They drag it out through appeals. And then it's 20 years later that you've got a final decision. All of the people who were involved in the initial decision are gone. They're retired. They've gotten their bonuses. They're sitting on a beach somewhere. They're not going to be held accountable. And so this is the problem of privacy today. We are increasingly accountable for everything, for what you tweet, for what you like, for what you read, for how far you scroll, that the hashtags that you search through, for the people that you associate with, for the avatar that you pick on social media system, for your profile picture. You're being judged not just by humans, but by systems. You are being made to live nakedly, transparently, before power that you are not permitted to possess yourself. So why are we, the people who are supposed to direct sort of our governmental institutions to act in favor of us, why are we being made transparent when we have very little power relative in terms of resources, in terms of executive authority? We control ourselves. Maybe we have some influence on our families and our labor, right? But those control capital. Those control staffs who control teams who wield real world power right now are becoming less transparent. That's why you should care about privacy, because privacy is power, and you're being told you can't have it. But the ones who have all the money, they can. People just infer, I think, innately, even if they can't express, even if they can't articulate it. That's wrong. That is literally trying to disempower free societies and subordinate them to institutions.
Well, I mean, it's quite literally an inversion of what's supposed to happen, right? It's supposed to be like we the people and consent of the government. And ideally, the government or the state is supposed to be a service provider for us. And in an ideal world, even fear
That's what
us,
we're taught, right?
Yeah.
In government schools.
Right. But I mean, I think like when you were, in your early 20s, you kind of recognized that you didn't have any politics of or of your own ideas. I was wondering how that's evolved over the time, or like how you would describe your politics today.
Yeah, I mean, first off, like what you write on the internet isn't necessarily reflective of what you truly believe as a person. A lot of people troll. I've done more than my share of trolling on the internet, even now on Twitter. But there is, I think, an important understanding that people change, they develop, they have ideas that they embrace very strongly at one point in their life, and then they reject them, they move beyond them, or they develop them and extend them. The idea of this permanent record, where people look up a social media post from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you're like 18 years old, you're like 40 years now, and they say, well, this is what you believe. Like, no, I don't know that person. That person doesn't exist anymore. That person is dead. The me of yesterday is not the me of today. You can create some inferences from this, right? But they're not reliable. And when I think about my own politics as they are today, I've never been a creature of party. I don't like the Republicans in the United States. I don't like the Democrats in the United States. I think largely we have a single party system. It's just branded differently. Because these parties, they are in full agreement that you and everyone like you, the people broadly, should be robbed for the benefit of the state and their party and the sort of the cronies who benefit from their connectedness to the state. But where they differ, and they do differ, is how the proceeds of the robbery should be portioned and allocated. And I think what that shows is a very developed system where we've run around of a certain kind of game so many times that a metagame has arisen from it. All of the players in the game, they understand how they are supposed to act to benefit themselves or sort of their tribe, their team, the most. And that has basically produced a system in which politicians, classically, famously, and throughout history in many different systems, don't say what they mean. They say what they believe will benefit them politically. But if we have an inauthentic system that then becomes an irresistible system because it has such a delta in power between the privileges and sort of authorities that the state possesses and the individual possesses, you've created a structural imbalance that weighs most heavily on the smallest in society. And that's I think it's difficult to use political terms today because they've been so poisoned, nobody understands what they mean. But if we want to create progress in human well-being, if we want to promote and advance the common welfare of all people, regardless of what they're like, what they believe, how they present themselves, whatever, what you profess to believe, what you like, who you associate with, but just anyone, anywhere, all the time, right? Rather than spying on all of these people, how can we lift them all up? How can we sort of advance human betterment? Well, putting all of the weight on these people and then not distributing sort of the benefits of that system equally, that's entirely contrary to the stated purpose of our systems. And I think that should be sort of corrected. So if you ask me, what my politics are, I'd say the politics of a reformist, right? We need to fix a very plainly broken system. And unfortunately, that's not really a popular idea right now. You see a lot of people, frankly, in a lot of countries that recognize the system is not functioning well, but you see they generally blame the other party. They go, my party is okay, but the other party, that's the problem. If we just elect more of my people, things will be all right. But if you look at, for example, like progressives with Joe Biden, they elected this guy to office on a campaign where he said he's going to be the new FDR, the new Roosevelt. He's going to create the new Deal. We're going to have a more fair, more equal, more just society. And we're going to improve the influence of individual labor and collective labor within the United States. And then with a few months of taking office, he's banning strikes by workers on the railroads. And it's just like, if this is not evidence of a system that is structurally well, I'm not sure what is. But these anecdotes, as they are, pile up, and they continue to pile up. Like we've had Trump, we've had Biden, we've had Obama, we've had Bush, we've had Clinton. You go back and back and back, like how many Bushes can you have? How many Clintons can you have? We seem to be going through the iterations. What we need is not a new politician. What we need is a reformed system. And if it won't sort of permit reform, then it should be erased and rebooted. Factory reset politics. Let's call it that.
Yeah, thank you. On that note, I just wanted to bring in Jarrad, because there were some themes there which I think are really, really relevant to our next question, which is, Jarrad, you've spent quite a lot of your time and resources, and you've dedicated the past few years into creating Logos. So can you tell us a bit about what the project is all about? And also why the politics matters. I've heard you talk about why the politics of this project is critical and it's important. So could you please elaborate a bit more on that front?
Yeah, I guess Snowden saying that he's a reformist, certainly like the preferable path, right? Because there is a system there. It largely functions aside from this sort of relentless fever by taking the opioid of mass surveillance. And I certainly hope that's possible. The question for me is, what if it isn't, right? And it really goes into to Snowden saying, yeah, like how do we actually sort of reboot some kind of governance system or create a just governance? And in your book, Permanent Record, you described Tor, the onion routing project. And it was created by the states and ultimately became the best tool for resisting state surveillance. And that Tor was arguably more neutral than Switzerland. And that neutrality aspect really resonates with me because it's so powerful. Like, political neutrality is kind of a prerequisite for a lot of our civil liberties, particularly when it comes to something like the freedom of speech or economic freedom. And if you are able to create a politically neutral system, then as a byproduct of that, you are kind of resisting political bias from entering into that system. And the sort of technologies that we've seen, from Tor and as they've evolved and developed around network obfuscation, we can start to combine that with other technologies that we've also seen, such as public blockchains, decentralized file storage, and messaging. And if we can do that, we can kind of make these anti-fragile systems even more anti-fragile. We can make them more politically neutral by, say, removing personhood. If you can't identify someone who's participating in that network and what they are putting through the service network, then you can get some stronger guarantees. Maybe guarantees is a too strong word, but the ability to be able to create this sort of politically neutral platform. And this kind of comes back to a latent sort of cypherpunk dream, which I think John Barlow probably put most eloquently in the Declaration of Independence in Cyberspace, where, in this sort of young internet that we grew up with, that had this sort of chaotic freedom and creativity, we also foresaw that how the states would fundamentally transform as a consequence of this technology. And we even foresaw the ability to create independence, view it as a separate political body. And so what this system can do is effectively uphold this sort of cypherpunk phrase like privacy for the weak and transparency for the powerful. And the way that I view a technology like this would be like a politically neutral, voluntarious social order, in which is capable of establishing a new constitution that is partially written in code and enforced by code, but also within the people who are moral and virtuous, ideally. And that this would create a strong foundation for upholding civil liberties, not for anyone on the planet that's willing to participate. But it's also really interesting because it gives you cheap exit costs. And if it's open source, it becomes forkable. And it's cheap in terms of its exit costs because you have explicit consent whenever you're transacting or whenever you're interacting with the network. But you can easily just not transact or even fork away from that network and if you have a different ideological structure. And for me, this is kind of a way to restore, like, the two institutions that betrayed us, both the Constitution and the internet. And the other aspect here that I think, if you look into the future, is like, what does this imply, right? So if you did have this technology, you'd have to, well, before you get to that, you need to understand that, like, the United Nations and, like, the US Department of Defense recognize cyberspace as a fifth domain of conflict next to land, sea, air, and space. And if you can deal with the sort of aspects of national sovereign claims over cyberspace, whether it's infrastructure or the people interacting with the network and the context of participation, and you can obfuscate that or remove this sort of political bias from it, then you start challenging this national claim of sovereignty over these certain aspects of cyberspace, which I find fascinating as an experiment. And if it's successful and you can do this for one, you can probably do it for all. And then you effectively have a terrorization of cyberspace, and it may even have implications for world order, as you would now be able to create a politically neutral medium for a rules-based order and strengthen universal human rights, while also allowing for vertical integration and of rules through these nations, and while allowing them to retain their sovereignty at the same time, because they could leave if it was no longer beneficial for them.
Yeah, I think, if I can just chime in on that, this is an extension of a sort of argument that I have made for a number of years in the beginning of the post-2013 period, which was, what do we do if states refuse to guarantee our rights? If they're actually working with some intentionality even to violate our rights? Can we use, math, science, technology to enforce rights beyond law? Because the idea is, we institute governments to create laws and to enforce laws. We are all presumed to have agreed to this social contract. We remove ourselves for the state of nature and kind of the Lockean way where we can do anything we want. We try not to, because of course we don't want violence, we don't want injury. But if we need to, or we desire to, or the urge is there, we can. Nothing stops us. We then voluntarily agree to narrow those freedoms to that which we have sort of said is a go and a no-go zone through this collective exercise of the creation of laws. But what happens when the institutions that are meant to enforce and protect those laws, to keep back sort of the borders of the state of nature, are beginning to exploit the state of nature against us? They are intruding into the domain they are meant to protect. What do you do when the law fails? And as I said, the hope is reform. You want to stop the bad behavior. But as you posited, what is the alternative there? And I think the question is reform or revolution. We basically have to be able to provide to states, both individually and globally, right? Because this is not an individual national problem. This is a global problem. And we have to go, which one of these do you guys prefer? You can either comport with the law, and not just the law as sort of the government interprets it, but the law as the public desires it, the law as the public intends it, the law as the public wishes it to be, right? Why is the government here? You are here to sort of express and defend the public will. Well, if you guys aren't willing to act consistent to the public, and you're not willing to return your actions to comply with the public will, which is what happened in 2013, by the way. They changed the law in a lot of cases, rather than making the intelligence agencies comply with law. They made the law comply with the desires and the activities of intelligence agencies. Rather than saying you guys are breaking the law, you all go to jail, or there's investigations, or you lose budget, or you change your programs to shut this down, which happened in very few cases, shutting down the program. But then they just a different program under new legal theory. It doesn't really matter. It's not meaningful. Nobody went to jail for this. Instead, they said, well, we changed the law to make what they're doing legal now so they can continue to do it, which is precisely contrary to the public will. So then you go, if you're not willing to do this, then we are going to either reboot the government, which is revolution, or we're going to explore what's beyond government, which is what's really interesting about sort of the cypherpunk movement, and it always has been. Can we create structures that, if universally, right, if not in physical space, where there's physical presence, physical expressions of violence, that math isn't going to be able to do a lot to protect you from? Can we do it in the digital space? Can we do it in some space where we go, the law is great and the law is there, but you don't need to trust the law, because we can invent a higher guarantee of our human ideal, right? Can we create an enforced right to privacy that is not expressed through law, but through code, a kind of higher law? And, a lot of people, particularly institutions, get lathered up about this. And there are legitimate criticisms of it. Who's deciding? How does this happen? What happens if the code changes? Who controls the code? But that's where I think the decentralization movement is so impactful, important, and frankly, just interesting. Can we create that social contract expressed globally, beyond borders, beyond cultures, beyond languages, where people opt into the network, and the network replaces, within the domain of the network, its jurisdiction, if you will, the guarantee of rights that it enforces through protocol rather than law?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And to the point on the sort of law aspect, and then like who changes the code, I think this is specifically why I use the term order, because it's very much concerned with the nature of the transactions happening, and having a high assurance that those transactions were done in the correct order, at least as far as the archive or the blockchain is concerned. But on top of this order, we can then create new arbitration services. We can import, existing common law. We can have a lot of the similar institutions. And if we do not get this sort of notion of reform, we may be able to create competitive governing services that starts to take away some of these institutions or offer a parallel service. And if it is more competitive, it starts to become a forcing function if a state wants to remain relevant or not. And the idea of providing corruption-resistant, censorship-resistant, stable institutions to anyone on the planet, and a plurality of them, so you no longer have like a one-size-fits-all policy, is just such an amazing idea to me, especially in this world where, we have exit, voice, and loyalty when it comes as an ultimatum from Albert Hirschman when it comes to the state. And we're seeing voice isn't really affecting the change that we anticipated to. And so if we're not going to
particularly relative
be loyal
to previous eras, and that's the question. If you have these traditional models, but then the traditional models begin to fail, we have to iterate. We have to go, well, what's broken down? I mean, this is, again, what happened and with the mass surveillance thing. This was not possible under American law. This was not possible under the U.S. Constitution, and yet it happened anyway. Henry Kissinger said famously, the illegal we do immediately. The constitutional takes a little bit longer. The idea is that, ultimately, when you're at the top of government or any large institution, there is that will to power that determines ultimately what the limits are. It's a question of who will stop you. And when you ask who will stop, the American government or any super state today, there are not a lot of very good answers. unless you change the game. And that's what the network is doing. It's creating a domain where government, if it cannot control the network, this is where you see a lot of desperation happening right now in government circles, where they are working, and actually quite effectively. We need to be very careful that they don't succeed here, of trying to control the network, trying to control the spread and permissibility of protocols and code. I mean, the Tornado Cash thing should have been a flashing red light for anyone involved in crypto, where we recognize, look, if they go far enough, right, and though our national laws apply internationally, they apply globally, they apply digitally to things that are well beyond our jurisdiction, that don't touch us, that don't interact with us in any way, which there's no reason argument. They should be able to say, we control the privacy of somebody on, the furthest corner of the earth, just because one of our bureaucrats didn't even pass a law, but had some interagency regulation or something like that. That prohibits this. Maybe we have to take our ball away and stop playing with them, right? And that post-national idea that's beginning to be expressed through different formulations, like the network state, it is really interesting, because we have to establish, or we have to consider, again, where did these governments come from? How did they come into being? What perpetuates them? Why are they here? The real answer that we don't really like to reflect on a lot is the monopoly on violence. They've got the guns, and that's what keeps them in place. But what if the guns, what if their opponents can't be killed with bullets? What if the violence can't apply? They start looking for the cracks and the weaknesses, where the human actors, where can they sort of lever the violence to try to impact on these other things. But as you move further and further away, particularly when you combine the resistance with the privacy and with the technology, with the new law that can be applied and guaranteed, not by a judge, not by letters on a page, right, but by math that is, to the best of our knowledge, unsolvable, in practical terms, that's an inabrogable guarantee. That's something that can't be terminated. It can't be shut down. It can't be, that they can't change the deal or take it back. Nobody can. And that is a good reason why you see these governments so alarmed, so concerned, and constantly talking about, save the children or whatever, and terrorism arguments to try to undermine your privacy. The government is not stupid. Collectively, it makes a lot of poor decisions. But remember, individually, at all levels of government, there are people of different capabilities, and there are some extraordinarily bright minds in there that can see far ahead. They identify with the state. They are the state. And the health of the state is psychologically the health of the person that works there for a lot of people. And so they will see your resistance as an act of violence against them, against their family that they identify with. And this is, we have to be careful to sort of avoid a conflict that we can't win until we've already won it. I think if we're clever in a lot of ways, we recognize that there is a future here that has yet to be imagined, but can already be reached in parts, not completely. And again, we do want human recourse. We do want human judgment. We do want some level of human authority that can be institutionalized for arbitration and remediation. It's not that there's no role for government, but we have to recognize where government has slipped the leash and sort of gone beyond the role that it's entrusted with, that it's invested with. How we can return it where possible, where we can forbid it where it's not, and where we can make sure, again, the bottom line is, why are we doing all of this? We're doing this to make life better for our generations and the one that's come next. If we focus on that, it doesn't really matter who's aligned against us. It's a contest for the future. And frankly, I think the many will always win against the few. The institutionalists, frankly, are the few. Even when you think in terms of like, cyberpunks are a small tribe, and it's true, but the popularity of these policies by the institutions is not high. The supporters are smaller than the resistors, and that is a trend that will continue. And I think as you have more young people who want to pursue this, who want to explore this, and who want to change the system, ultimately in time they will. But you still got to worry about the guns and the violence.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's why I kind of view revolution as maybe it is revolutionary, but the nature of the revolution doesn't necessarily require bloodshed, because it is a peaceful opting out in many ways. And there's ways that we can deploy this technology that's compatible in these sort of, at least in the early stages. So the way that I view the sort of tech stack that I'm describing as a sort of governance operating system, and then you could take this to, say, a host nation to establish, say, a special economic zone. And with that, you get some rights for doing public administration. You deploy the technology for doing public administration over it, but it's very much within the confines of a very specific territory. And the reason why a host nation might want to do this, or why they do a special economic zone in the first place, is because they're expecting a higher outputs in some way, which leads to higher tax revenues from that region. And if you can show that its potential in this case, then you'll get more adoption from other places. And of course, it is not inherently bound by the region that it's operating in, but it could actually be put anywhere and everywhere. So to me, like, there is definitely a peaceful path forward that is within the limitations and maybe allows the state to become more familiar with this technology, while also upholding these principles and defending itself just by virtue of its underlying properties and principles.
One of the things that I know, Jarrad, it's been one of your primary intellectual occupations, at least for the past few months, and Edward mentioned a few times, is a concept of network state. And at Logos, you've created this project, you've dedicated all of these resources and time and everything else to it as an organization, as a project that will create the infrastructure for the network state. And I just wanted you to go a bit more into detail, anything that you've not mentioned so far about Logos as this project that's dedicated to creating the infrastructure for the network state.
Yes, I mean, the decentralized technology stack itself is like state infrastructure in a similar way that you would build out railways or roads, set up, basic institutions and these sort of things. In many ways, it's a fundamental policy that everyone has to subscribe to, so it has to be entirely general. Everyone who wants to participate in that is that instantation of it. Which creates a sort of downward pressure to prevent any other policy getting into that would then create a contentious hard fork. But then on top of this, you can actually start to create state systems, and we've kind of already talked about this already, whether it's sort of arbitration services, but you can also do forms of law enforcement that are maybe look a bit more like how we're used to interacting with car ride sharing services or food delivery services. You could have basically an online citizen's watch, and maybe that's attached to a rating system for people to actually deploy vigilante-style law enforcement. And a lot of these ideas, I guess, are reflected in sort of like an anarcho-capitalist sort of worldview. And while my sort of ideology has evolved and probably matured from then, there are some ideas or alternative ways of establishing these institutions that is more compatible with, a decentralized technology stack. And this decentralization aspect of it is also really important in the sense that it requires the explicit consent of the people to participate within that network. And it also allows it to reroute itself around physical attacks in many ways, whether they are attacks on the network itself or attacks physically on some of the participants. it's not inherently bound to a geopolitical boundary. It demarks its own boundary of political boundary within the net. And that affords some amazing sort of future scenarios where you may have fundamentally very different culturally homogeneous communities all living within the same physical location, such as a city, yet operating under fundamentally different laws. And they will still be able to interact with each other because there will be, you could imagine that reconciliatory laws or glue code between these different ways of life would actually be able to manifest themselves.
When I think about you mentioned decentralization. There's a lot of challenges with the current infrastructure. Like again, we have to assess why has government failed so badly, and not just in one country, but in many countries. It seems they're becoming less representative of what the public desires. Those publics are becoming, frankly, more neurotic. Because they're being pressured, they're being influenced by competing interest groups to hate one another, to recite sort of slogans and to deepen divides, to sort of widen the distances between themselves and their neighbors. In the same way that the parties have been distanced, even though they're part of the same animal, at least in sort of a dual party, which happens to be single party state, like in the US, where these people agree on basically everything beyond few civil issues, things when it comes to the application of violence, when it comes to the size of the government, right? They both want to expand territorially, they both want to expand financially. They just argue over which direction to expand in. And I think one of the problems when we look at the network compared to the people is we see the influence from one beginning to bleed over onto the other. We talk about, again, how things have changed from 2013. One of the things I don't think a lot of people were expecting is the public desire for censorship increasing in a lot of places. There has been I can't think of the word for it, but a growing pressure and influence by institutions and governments to convince the public that the answer to their problems, to their political divides, is a growing intolerance for free expression. To say, if we just stop the other people from talking, everything will get better. That is actually a stairway to violence that will ultimately resolve itself in conflicts that will be very costly and that will be very damaging to the social, national, and global order. We see that already happening in a lot of cases, or in a few cases, rather. But I think the thing that we need to think about in terms of decentralization is even if we can decentralize the protocols, governments are able to maintain their position today because the access to the protocols is not decentralized. What I mean by this is we don't own the infrastructure, but someone else does in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in France, right? You rely upon an internet service provider. In basically every country, this is true. You have to go through someone else's gateway. You have to go through someone else's wires that you are not granted a right to pass through. In the same way that it is presumed that you will have access to water, even though you don't, right? Like you have to pay the water bill at your house. You have to pay the internet bill at your house. But you can go to a public water fountain park and connect. Well, in a lot of countries, you can't do that with the internet. You have to, show ID or associate your phone number with the gateway service or the wireless access point provider or whatever to connect to the network. And even in the countries where that's not happening, that's not policy today, it could be tomorrow. At any given moment, the governments can direct that access to this website be blocked. And we think like in the United States, that's not possible. Well, that just happened with Tornado Cash. They said this is a crime. Anybody connecting to it has violated sanctions. I can't even remember the penalty, but it's something like 10 years count or something insane that if you interact with the smart contract. You can't just be like, oh, well, I'll connect to the internet without them. We build ways to layer over that. Virtual private networks, anonymous technologies, things like Tor, like you said, onion routing or whatever, to try to take the naked freeway and build our own tunnel, build our own camouflage as we route down it. And that's a heck of a lot better than nothing. But those can, in many places in the world, are blocked. There's a lot of network filtering going on. It's a cat and mouse game. It's never perfect. But for the average person who is not an expert, who is not a technologist, those blocks can basically designate which parts of the internet they can reach and which parts they can't. And I think something that people don't talk enough about is the decentralization of access, the decentralization of infrastructure. And I don't mean software and protocols, I mean physical wires in the ground. It is true that it's expensive to lay infrastructure. Somebody has to pay for it. It has to get there somehow. Frankly, I think these things should be done on a municipal level, a community level. Then once it's amortized, it's paid off. It's a public good. And frankly, if we were responsible for maintaining this ourselves, those skill sets would become more common. It would be really ugly in the interim. But, even in a world where there's no more plumbing, rain falls from the sky, there's, water, pools, and lakes. It's not a world that we want to go back to, but there is some state where people can independently access some necessary resource. We have moved into a world where we sort of presume access to the internet, that you need this to exist, to get a job, to communicate, to engage in commerce, to buy anything, to just function in a modern society, to go to the doctor, to get your results, whatever. But you don't have any way to access that without going through some institution, without going through some payment system, without showing some ID, without connecting something to your home address, which presumes that you have a home, or your phone, which presumes that you have a phone, or some way of automated electronic billing. For the majority of people, there are still some cash gateway in some countries. But we need to recognize that if we want to move beyond this world of sort of institutional control there, we need to de-institutionalize access to the network.
I mean, absolutely. Like certainly in developed countries, there's just layers and layers of infrastructure we depend on, and every society does. Whether it's energy or water, or, sanitation, and everything that's up on the stack. An example comes to mind for the case that you're outlining was probably the 2017 Catalan independence referendum, and in that, they actually deployed, to their credit, these sort of referendum forms through IPFS, along with using decentralized technologies to participate. Yet, most people, the average person who was participating in this, accessed IPFS through web proxies. And the Spanish government came in and blocked access to these specific URLs, and made it very, very difficult for a lot of people to participate in that referendum. Having that said, Barcelona in particular, in Catalan, they do have, I think it's called Gwix, which is a independent meshnet network of, I think, 30,000, 40,000 nodes. So it is possible to at least establish these sort of local networks for a particular region. And if it is as easy as accessing a Wi-Fi, you'll connect it to maybe a local 5G tower, assuming that you don't care about the bands that you're running on. That might certainly be a possibility. But even that sort of highlights another issue, right? Is that all of the hardware kind of needs to be. There's another centralization factor. It's we're very dependent on the chips that we run inside our computers, and you know better than anybody how those can be manipulated. And until we have very open hardware and we are able to create processes of the kind of computational capacity within a sort of local setting, it still is another attack vector or vulnerability for being able to access network-based systems.
And it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because previously in our history, we have never seen sort of that chip choke point being exploited as a weapon of policy. Now we are, for the first time, we're starting to see access to chips choked off over policy disagreements. Right now, it's being applied internationally. But there's a history when you look at, for example, mass surveillance and these capabilities, where they would do it outside the country first. They do it in the war zone. They do it in Afghanistan. They do it in Iraq. They test these capabilities. They expand them. They iterate on them. They improve them until they're reliable, until they see what they can do in a place where they think laws just don't apply. And no one will care if they get caught, frankly. And it's hard to say, but they were right in a lot of cases. Nobody cared if they violated the rights of everyone in Afghanistan, and they did. People, who are not Taliban, people who are not terrorists. But there's no social connection there. There's no sort of emotional connection there. These people have been othered. And I think we underestimate how easy that othering process is. And eventually these capabilities move from war front to home front. And that's happened in all of our countries. Capabilities and authorities that were exclusively used at the very highest scale for the top targets, as they became cheaper, as they became more advanced, as they became more sophisticated, as they became more available, and as they became easier to use, as they became just more fluent in using these, commercial markets and commercial providers comprised of employees who left government. They used to wear, sort of the uniform. Then they go check out on their own, doing the same thing they did for the government, but then selling to the government. And then the government drops their contract and they start selling to other governments. And then eventually that trickles down to its own private market, some criminal market or whatever. So we see the exploit market, particularly in Israel, with malware has sort of developed. And these things start being used everywhere. They're in the hands of every police station with a significant budget. I think when you look at how economies work, you have to consider how property works. Where does property originate from? Why do you have a claim to something? What makes it yours? And how is it that you can say you own this home, this car, this stick, this rock, whatever? The idea is, going back to the idea of the state of nature, you mix your labor with something. You invest your life into something, and that makes it yours. Well, if the government can require you to transact any exchange in a currency that they control, that is theirs, that they can change, right? You worked your whole life, you socked your money under the mattress, and then in your Doge, when you're retired, you expect to have a certain good life. And then they inflate the currency. They print, an enormous amount of that, which reduces the value of that which you strived your entire life to save, that you were counting on, that you were planning your life around. It turns out that was never yours after all. The government has actually violated the right to private property in that case by requiring you to invest your life into something that they would invalidate. And why do they do that? Why do they print money, right? When we look historically, it's almost always to permit a state of war and the perpetuation of war beyond what the economy, taxation policies, and public will would support. It's to prolong unpopular and unnecessary wars, frankly, that they cannot afford. It allows the government to spend beyond its limits by spending beyond your limits. So this is, again, where the government has violated its compact with its people, with the public generally. How do you prevent them from doing that? How do you make government sort of respect the property rights that it was instituted to defend, well, you keep them away from your money. You allow them to arbitrate. You allow them to regulate, but you recognize that money is not something that belongs to anyone in the abstract sense, right? If government can create it, it's not money, because money must be a reliable store of value. It must be something that will still be there tomorrow that you can count on in your retirement. If they can inflate it away, it's not actually money. It's something else. It's, a kind of token. And yeah, we can all, make our own dog coins or whatever, but that's not frankly money. Not in the real sense, not in the sense that we must be able to rely on. The reason we used gold throughout history was government can't print gold. They can debase it. They can try to force you to accept it, and they have. And that's always a government in decline. That's always a government that's trying to expand beyond its means, that's trying to expand beyond its public's means eventually. And those governments fall. They collapse, and they always have. It's a universal law. That's history. That's how it works. How do we prevent that? Because every government in time will be seduced by it. It's not a process that happens over 10 years. It's a process that plays out over hundreds. The only way to protect against that is to make money neutral, something that no one controls, but everyone can use. And I think that's the interesting thing that we're looking at here. Whether it's gold, whether it's crypto, whether it's something else, is not so interesting to me as the fact that it is neutral and it arbitrates without fear or favor against everyone, whether we're talking about citizen or whether we're talking about state.
Yeah, I mean, this neutrality aspect is certainly, in terms of a world reserve currency, is certainly a hot topic today. We're now starting to see various countries move away from what is considered to be the world currency today. But I mean, crypto also has its own challenges. Like, one of the properties of sound money that we need to implement is like this notion of fungibility, which is something that Tornado Cash was effectively implementing. And if we don't have this fungibility, then one token or coin or whatever is no longer worth the same kind of token, depending on the context and its history. And so, yeah, this aspect is also incredibly important, which also bolsters its neutrality.
Yeah, and I mean that's the whole point of what the government is doing. The dollar is not fungible. People think that it is, but have you ever bought a money counting machine or used one, worked at a bank, anything like that? Most people would answer no, and so they don't know that the new money counters that you give your money to the bank, they go through the deposit or whatever, it goes and sort of tells you how many bills are in it, and then they credit your deposit, and that it images all the bills that go through it, and it takes a little picture of all the serial numbers in it. And it does optical character recognition on it as fast as that machine works. And it enters them all into a little database. And those little money counters have Ethernet ports on them that connect to the local network that then sends all the numbers, all the bills that were in this machine to the bank headquarters. And then these all flow upstream to the government, right? It's, of course, not being done at every 7-Eleven yet, simply because it's expensive. But as these capabilities become cheaper, it will. And the bottom line is the individual bills, as they move through the economy, are tracked. And if you don't believe me, just go look at the capabilities of these money counting machines today. Yeah, right. No, but I mean that's is more for the viewers. But the government doesn't want fungible money. They don't want sound money. They want controllable money. They want money that serves them. And when you see all these central bank digital currencies that they're talking about, regardless of which country they're being launched in, I think we just saw Brazil, maybe in the last couple of days, put an Ethereum smart contract up for some kind of proof of their CBDC. And it's got burn and move addresses and freeze sort of functions in the smart contract. And the idea is they can just take your money and say, poof, it's gone. They can say, we want to credit this account with more money. Poof, it's there. Like, that's not different than how currencies work traditionally now, except it's easier to reach for them. They don't have to go into your mattress. They don't have to count your bills because they can see every bill everywhere all the time. They can track all of the tokens. And that's extraordinarily dangerous. And this is why I'm constantly preaching against central bank digital currencies of this kind of flavor design. But that's what they're all pursuing because, when you talk about cryptocurrency is going to solve all of our problems, well, you got to remember how the state is going to use these things because they're going to say, okay, cryptocurrency it is, but you have to use our version. You have to use our e-dollar or whatever. In the US, frankly, extraordinarily and wonderfully, does have some legislative opposition to the imposition of a central bank digital currency. But a lot of other countries are racing to be the first to get a big one out here because they recognize what an advantage that's going to be for them to be able to track and manipulate and basically spend the lives and fortunes of everyone who interacts with their economy. And that's a very dangerous thing. That's the opposite direction of where we need to be moving, which is to a more neutral form of currency. If the government, wants to, raise its revenues to be able to, build bridges, fight a war, whatever, pass a tax. That's what they've always done. We don't like taxes, right? But at least have a process for it. They realize that passing taxes is a great way to lose power. And that's why we have these new currency systems, is because they want to tax you through the back door. They want to spend your money without asking you, without sort of giving you a vote against it. And that's why we have the inflation that we have today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm certainly a proponent against CBDCs myself. I definitely talk about the same issues. And perhaps more concerning is, you can go to CBDC Tracker and see where all these different countries going, implementing or researching these different schemes. But the IMF is also starting to look at implementing their own version, which terrifies me because this would be, a global financial system in which if you say something wrong, like a mean tweet or something like that, you might be economically exiled everywhere on the planet, which is wild to me. But switching gears a little bit, and speaking of things that people aren't necessarily aware of, there's sort of a complacency when it comes to encrypted content. Certainly if you're using a private instant messenger, right? And people think that they're secure using something like perfect forward secrecy. But there's also the metadata component that is incredibly important here. I was wondering if you could describe some of the issues around metadata and how it can be used against people.
Yeah, so I think the easiest way for people to understand metadata who aren't familiar with it is metadata just means activity records, right? They don't have the content of every communication that happened today. Think of it as a private eye following you around from morning till night. They see when you woke up because they see your phone become active on the network. They presume your phone is perfectly encrypted. They don't see what it's connecting to, but they know this is the phone bill that you pay. Here's when it spikes in the morning. You're downloading your emails. You're looking at YouTube videos. You're checking whatever social networks you use. That person's no longer sleeping. Then they see you leave your home, right? You drive in your car, you get on the bus, whatever. Where do you go? Do you work? Do you go to the cafe? You meet with someone? They see that you met this person. They can follow that person home. They can see where that person went. They can identify that person pretty easily because of billing records, home addresses, whatever. They don't go in the cafe to hear everything that you say because you might notice that you're being followed, right? They do it from a distance. But step by step, just by observing you, just by seeing your movements, just by seeing your associations, just by seeing your affiliations, do you go to law, library and things like that? Well, which library? Can they see that you connect to a certain website because the internet address of that website? Yeah, they can. Maybe they didn't see the exact articles that you downloaded, but they know your politics based on whether you're reading the Wall Street Journal or whether you're reading the New York Times or whether you're reading, Zero Hedge or something else entirely. I think when you think of it in terms of activity records, it becomes much more clear. Metadata is creating a picture of your movements, of your associations, of your affiliations. And from this, they try to basically pad out the permanent record of your life. It's a index of your life, right? More so than the compendium of everything that you said in your messages. To be able to, when you're using an encrypted message, tell what you're actually saying, they have to hack your phone or the phone of the person that you're communicating with, because that's where the two communications are resident, unless it's something like Google, where it's not real encryption, but Google has a copy too, and then they just ask Google, to cough it up. But the idea is, even without the content, they can tell a significant amount about who you are, what you're doing, what you're interested in. They reduce your privacy significantly, even though it's presumed that you have no privacy interest, and this is under the law, at least in the United States, in your metadata. Particularly if these records are held by third-party companies, your cell phone company, your bank, anything like that. The government can go to it with a much lower legal standard and get these under the so-called third-party doctrine. They say these are not your records, so you don't have an interest in them. You can't sort of defend against it using a Fourth Amendment claim. They say these records belong to the company, even if they're about you. And that's one of the things in law that we really need to change in order to make things better. One of the other things that I caution people against, just to sort of wrap things up as we head into the end of the conversations here, one of the most immediate threats that we're facing in terms of policy and government today, in the UK specifically, the EU a little bit later this year, their legislatures are trying very, very, very hard. And it's very serious. You should not underestimate them. To force companies to build backdoors into their encryption schemes, to allow them, if the government goes to them with a warrant, to say, to protect the children, to save the puppies, these companies must be able to provide them an unencrypted copy of any sort of text or communication that the government demands. There is no way to do this and maintain a secure encryption scheme. Governments know this. They're simply doing this because they want to be able to get to any communication anywhere. And they're going to go after big companies that have a lot of money and basically scare them away from providing truly reliable encrypted communication systems. Instead, get them to provide these lower backdoor versions. And then they also want to get, of course, the sort of on-device scanning. Apple tried to sort of shim into an iOS update, I think almost 2 years ago now, and failed when everybody bit their face off because it was a horrific idea. But they're going to try to push that through legislatures, since they couldn't get through the back door of just getting a company to do that. We need to be very much on guard against that, and people need to be starting to form movements right now. Sort of associations, talk to your friends so that when you see these things in the news, you can absolutely blow up the phones of your representatives. Or if that doesn't work, find a new solution around it, because right now we are in a very limited software ecosystem. You're either using a Google phone or an Apple phone for the vast majority of people. And if those two companies say, okay, well, these governments can do anything for anyone.
So, this is a question to both of you. This is about thinking ahead. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities when it comes to our fundamental freedoms? We covered quite a lot, but I want to hear it from both of you. But before doing that, I just want to remind you of something that Julian Assange mentioned in his 2012 book, Cypherpunks, Freedom and the Future of the Internet. He famously said that this is the last free generation, right? Looking ahead, what do we need to do that in a few years' time, imagine we're redoing this conversation? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What do we have to do to make sure that that generation was not the last free generation and future generations will also be free?
Jarrad, let's start with you.
Okay. So You've mentioned that the policies that are being implemented and the actions that are being taken are not popular with the general people. Yet, in many ways, they feel kind of disempowered. And another fear of mine is that maybe the situation could even be normalized, if not this generation, but in another generation. And we are constantly distracted through media that we might not even have enough attention to kind of place in the correct directions. So for me, while we can work on the technology, the ones who understand it, what really matters is kind of growing the culture and understanding and giving the tools and letting them understand that like there is actually another way that can be done. And if it can be better, then it becomes a no-brainer. But the other aspect, which you also alluded to, is the usability and the accessibility. These are also other fronts that need to be moved forward. And it might take a decade or two if we have that much borrowed time, but it's definitely possible.
I think about that Assange idea, and it's interesting to me because, one of the things about getting older is you realize how much you didn't know when you were younger that you thought you did know. Then you see more and more examples. And I think when we look back through history, when we look back even through our history, we have to ask ourselves, were we free? Have we been free? Were we born free? Is this a free system? Is it a fair system? Is it what we were taught in school? And I think that's actually a much more open and controversial question than we presume it to be. People will say, yeah, we're a free country. People say it with the frequency that they did when we were younger, which is what I think Assange is key on. The internet is not free today in the way it was when we were younger. We are being made slaves to our past through that permanent record in the same way that we were becoming subjects of our government rather than partners to our government. The idea that governments are subordinate to us is the sort of found idea of democracy and democratic representation. But how long has that stayed the case, in fact, under any democratic system? Right? When you look at France, which has the longest democratic tradition that actually has a meaningful protest movement, how responsive is that government, is the Macron government right now today, to the public desire, to the public will? Does that mean we're not free in final terms? Does that mean we will be less free in the next term? Do trends proceed predictably in all cases? I don't think so. And that's where the hope comes from. Because yes, if you look at the world today, if you look at the direction of policy, governments that we consider to be classically, or we are taught that are open and liberal societies, are becoming more authoritarian. They're becoming more closed off. They're passing more laws with stricter penalties because they are struggling to scale in the same ways that sort of protocols and process builders and technology are. The reason that you can't contact anybody when your Gmail account gets locked is because they don't want to pay that many people to deal with all the complaints. It's inefficient. So they simply go, well, we'll just change the process. So you go through an automated appeals process. And if the machine, can't unlock your account because the IP address you're appealing from isn't one that's in its record, or you don't know what day you registered your Gmail account 15 years ago or something like that. Or 6 months later, it gets to a human reviewer, and the human reviewer who spends 5 seconds on the appeal doesn't agree with you. You're out of luck. There is no recourse, right? Well, governments are trying to do the same thing. Institutions are trying to do the same thing. Google is trying to govern in the same way that states do, sort of their domain, where they have a very few, relative to the broader public, number of officials as it were, people who can act and exercise official authority, and a very large number of people that they serve in reality, who serve them, but they like to think that they're serving their subjects or customers, as it were. The customers are, in fact, ad companies, not the users. But the idea is that they're becoming more authoritarian, they're becoming more restrictive, they're becoming more efficient as they are, which means we have fewer avenues, which means we have fewer recourses. We're becoming more quantified in our daily lives. We're becoming observed, we're becoming tracked, we're becoming logged in more ways. As you walk down the street, your cell phone is leaving records, every cell phone tower that passes. Those records are in the hands of big companies that hold them basically forever. They monetize them, they trade them, they sell them, they report them. But there's also the license plate on your car that is now photographed by automatic number plate recognition algorithms that are baked into the silicon of the cameras. You don't even have to pay extra for this. It's just in the camera. You can look this up. They're available right now. You can get a license plate reading camera on Amazon, tonight. It can also do human detection. It can also do vehicle detection. It's made by Chinese companies like Hike Tech and Dahua. And they're going to expand more and more these capabilities. As the capabilities become possible, their implementations become practical on a broader level. And so as the individual loses privacy, as we discussed at the very beginning of this conversation, they lose power. This means, if you look at the direction of the future, which is what Assange was reflecting on, you see a disempowered public, which means you have disempowered individuals, which means you have a loss of freedom. You have loss of agency. You don't have the ability to act and influence the world around you. You are instead being influenced. You are being shaped. You are being nudged. You are being judged. As we see the rise of machine intelligence, the development of that, which is, accelerating, frankly, even though I don't think the scariest voices in the field there are the most accurate. It is true that we see significant advantages happening there very rapidly, which means machines are going to be able to make their own judgments based on very loose directives from the people over them to decide if you match a certain profile, if you match a certain activity, if you match the detection algorithms, just like it categorizes an image that it sees as a license plate, as a vehicle, as a person. It can say you are a supporter, you are a valuable customer, you're a vagrant, you're somebody they don't want there. These judgments are going to pile up, and we're going to be surrounded by a world of gates that we're not allowed to pass through without permissions. Who is granting permissions? Well, these gatekeepers. We were not born into a world of the same number of gates. There were still gates, there were still borders, there were still boundaries, there were still territories that we could not pass freely through, like fields in the state of nature. But does it mean that there were fewer gates, that we were born free? No, we still were limited in the same way. The question is, will we learn collectively to change the construction of these gates where they're allowed? Will we limit them? Will we not be able to? Will they be constructed regardless? Will we live in these world of doors that we don't control? And if so, will we teach the ways and methods to our children to simply climb over them? Because that's the interesting part about human nature. Regardless of the laws, regardless of the systems that we're born into, regardless of the methods of sophistication or capabilities of these systems of control that are wrapped around us, we learn. Even if you have no lawful authority, you see a camera on a pole, you have a stick, you have a solution. You have to figure out how to mitigate the consequences of that, right? Because, of course, we are being judged by these systems. But ultimately, today, at least, and I think in the immediate generation follows the generation of my children who are sleeping downstairs right now, we will still have more capability than the machines if we put our minds to it. We have to develop our capabilities. We can't sleepwalk into the future, or we will be controlled by it. But so long as there is a wall, I promise you we will find a way to build a ladder. And that's why we're all here today. That's what this conversation is about. We need not just to build ladders, but to tear down walls.